My name is John W. Shoemaker, and this is my life. The way I put it is a silent beginning and beyond. My full name is John Woodrow Shoemaker. I was named for President Woodrow Wilson. I was born on 5/9/17, Missoula, Montana. I started out in life with my deaf parents, and so I call it silent beginning. One time my mother and I was in the courthouse, and it just said a son was born to the Shoemakers. It didn't have any name. So I picked the name John and pushed Woodrow a middle name. My stepsister was 9 years old when I was born. Her name was Helen Peary. She'd been a very wonderful sister. She just helped me get along in life. She was my only friend. See, my folks were deaf mutes, and she taught me to talk. She went to school in Missouri, so she wasn't there all the time, and I really missed her when she was gone. She worked in a grocery store, and she'd give me $1 or something like that, and I never had any money, and it was just wonderful. She was just special. And I had a half-brother. He was in the U.S. Navy in World War II, or World War I, and his name was Elmer Shoemaker. And I had a brother, Henry Peary, and he was on a freight train coming home from down south where he worked. He'd send his money home, and he was coming with his cousin, and they jumped off of a train in Frenchtown and jumped in front of another one, and both were killed. And they had the coffins in my aunt's front room, and it was her boy, Fred Jameson, and Henry Peary, my half-brother, and he was about 17 years old. My brother, Wallace, he was raised by a family and his relatives in Missouri, and so I didn't know him till I was 40 years old. But we corresponded a little bit, and then they started coming through Missoula to go to Walla Walla to work at a canning factory, canning things. And they'd come every year, and I got acquainted with them that way. Dad worked in the sawmill. In the first sawmill before I was born, he had his hand cut off. So he had a special leather sleeve made on him, and he spent the rest of his life on the green chain. When I was a child, I lived between Fort Missoula and the fairgrounds. And there's 3 houses there then. And they had the land between the houses and the streets quite a ways. They call them the flats. And the Indians pitched their tents there and dug bitterroots. When I was a kid, I always wanted to ride a horse. And my neighbor, he was an Indian, and he had a work horse. And I'd pull it up to the fence and curl on the fence up and get on it and ride it around. It was a work horse, but it was a thrill. And one day he said to me, he said, "John," he says, "would you like to, I have a garbage route downtown, would you like to go along?" I said, "Sure." So I climbed up in the wagon with him, and along we went, and he bought some chewing tobacco. And he says, "You want some?" Yeah, I took a big mouthful and swallowed it. And that's the Indian way of training you not to do it. Didn't like going to school, so I would go up on we call it Mount Minton. It's next to Mount Sentinel, and there was a farm up there and had sheep. And an Indian and his wife, they had a beautiful big teepee, and it was nice and clean. And I stayed there with them. And we heard the sheep down the hill to what is now the University Golf Course. the truant officers would catch me and bring me back to school, and then finally they called me incorrigible. When I got in the 3rd grade, I learned to read. And boy, it was like going to a movie because I didn't have anything like that. And so I read books like Tom Swift and Horatio Alger, and I was getting up to Zane Grey's and some of those, and the teacher says I was getting on beyond my class, but I loved to read. Oh, I had movie heroes. I had Tom Mix and Hoot Gibson, and all those are cowboys. Movies was 10 cents, and we lived out by it. Where we lived was on the streetcar route. We rode streetcars to town. And we went generally pretty near every Saturday, and it was 10 cents for kids and 20 cents for adults. I went to the Franklin and then the Lowell and then Missoula County High School, which is now Helgate. My dramatics teacher, I talked in the monotone for years and years because of my background. And she taught me to throw my voice at the back wall, and she could make me feel like $1 million or 2 cents just by her expression. My life as a teenager was in a home, and very boring. You have no love in a home. And they put me there because I was incorrigible, so what they called. And in this home I had kids that were from divorced parents, or they were incorrigible too. And so there was 8 to 10 in this home. And I lived there for 9 years, and I got awful discouraged because I just didn't have any love. Nobody cared for me. Being in a home where you didn't get to do any extracurricular activities, and so I didn't get to do much of anything except go to school. And that was boring too, because the extra activities you do is what makes high school interesting. When the kids ran away from home, they ran to their parents or something like that, and they got caught and brought back. So I figured when I ran away from home, I would leave the country or leave the state. And so when the time came that I decided to leave, I went down to the railroad tracks and contacted a man, and he advised me to go get a coat and then come back, but what he was trying to do was get me to go home. But anyway, I went back to the car, but the car was gone. So I went back out to the yards there and got talking to the fellows, and they told me which trains to take and how to get on a boxcar and this, that, and the other. And so I took off, and I had just a slight jacket on, and it was March, and it was cold. And I wrapped up in papers that was in the car, boxcar, and made out the first night.